live in an era that glorifies strength. In a world where image often outweighs essence, the ability to appear unshakable, to always be in control, has become a silently demanded virtue from everyone. From childhood, we learn that showing weakness is dangerous. Tears are interrupted with phrases like, "Swallow your tears," "Get up and keep going," "Don't be weak." And so, little by little, the idea that we must be strong all the time becomes rooted in the collective unconscious. The result is an army of individuals who wear an invisible armor every day, a mask of constant strength. Men and women who, on the outside, seem to have everything under control, their careers, relationships, families. But inside, they carry an increasingly unbearable weight. In silence, because admitting that they are not well would be seen as failure, as weakness. But what if this demand for constant strength is not strengthening us, but destroying us from within? This is the provocation that authors like Gabor Maté and Erich Fromm present to us. According to them, this socially constructed mask not only distances us from our essence, but imposes a high price on our physical and mental health. The continuous repression of legitimate emotions generates chronic tension, a constant state of alert that wears down the body and corrupts the mind. It is no wonder that we live in an era of silent epidemics. Anxiety, depression, autoimmune diseases, and psychosomatic disorders are becoming increasingly common among those who supposedly can handle everything. This video seeks to reveal the hidden mechanisms behind this ideal of strength that has been sold to us. It is not a superficial self-help discourse. It is a deep analysis based on the thoughts of Maté, Fromm, and other great scholars of the human psyche that dismantles the illusion that being invulnerable is the path to health and respect. Prepare for an uncomfortable and revealing journey, because you may discover that this strength of yours, so praised and admired, is, in fact, consuming you from within, and that the true path to healing and freedom begins when you allow yourself to finally be human. The demand to be strong all the time is not just an individual choice. It is a carefully constructed cultural trap built over decades, or perhaps centuries, that seeps into every aspect of modern life. It is not merely a familial or personal expectation. It is a social imperative fueled by an economic and political system that values the appearance of invulnerability and autonomy above any other human trait. At the core of this culture is the ideology of late capitalism, which Erich Fromm masterfully analyzed in the Sane society. Fromm argues that we live in a society where having has replaced being. A person's value is no longer in their authenticity, their capacity to feel, or their emotional depth, but in their ability to display success, control emotions, and maintain the image of someone unflappable. Life transforms into a constant performance. We are evaluated by external metrics: productivity, status, social visibility. Vulnerability, in this context, is not a sign of humanity, but a flaw to be corrected or hidden. This mentality manifests from childhood. Children who show intense emotions are quickly taught to control themselves. Don't cry. Swallow your tears. Be strong. Boys, especially, receive rigid emotional training. Crying is for the weak. Expressing fear or insecurity is unacceptable. But it's not just them. Girls, over time, are pressured to demonstrate emotional strength, especially in the corporate world or when taking on multiple roles in modern society. The girl boss culture of the woman who handles everything without ever faltering is just another version of this trap. Social media amplifies this phenomenon to unprecedented levels. We live under constant surveillance, not from an authoritarian state, but from the collective gaze of digital masses. Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, all these platforms reinforce the need to appear in control, happy and strong. Weaknesses are carefully edited out of the frame, and so the pressure becomes relentless. Showing suffering risks reputation, compromises a carefully constructed image. Even in moments of crisis, we are compelled to smile, to demonstrate resilience, to use pain as fuel for a narrative of overcoming. Suffering transforms into personal marketing. The consequence of this environment is the growing alienation from the authentic self. As Fromm describes, the individual comes to exist in relation to the mask they have built. The more perfect the exterior, the emptier the interior becomes. Instead of feeling like complete human beings, entitled to doubts, fears, and vulnerabilities, we begin to see ourselves as products that need to be sold to the market, whether the job market or the social market. The authentic self is lost beneath layers of persona, and genuine connection with others, and with oneself, becomes increasingly rare. This dissonance between the appearance of strength and internal reality generates a state of chronic emotional tension. Maintaining the facade of invulnerability requires immense psychic effort. The body becomes a silent battleground where repressed emotions, sadness, anger, fear, continue to exist, but are constantly pushed into the unconscious. This repression, as we will see, is not neutral. It triggers physiological processes that erode health. The alienated individual, who does not allow themselves to feel, inevitably becomes ill. But how exactly does this emotional repression transform into physical symptoms? How does the body respond to this invisible psychic burden? The answers to these questions emerge clearly in the works of Gabor Maté, who reveals the hidden cost we pay for sustaining this mask of strength. In the next part, we will delve into Maté's insights and explore how the body says no when the mind insists on saying yes. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. When we talk about strength, we usually think of muscles, mental endurance, resilience in the face of adversity. But we rarely reflect on what happens in the body of someone who, day after day, forces themselves to maintain that unshakable facade. According to Gabor Maté, this emotional repression has a profound cost, a cost that sooner or later the body will demand. In When the Body Says No, Maté argues that there is a direct connection between emotional health and physical health. The body is not a machine isolated from the psyche. Emotions are not mere transient states of the mind. They are biological processes that interact directly with the nervous system, the immune system, and hormones. When these emotions are repressed, when the individual refuses, or is socially conditioned to refuse, to feel sadness, anger, fear, or vulnerability, this psychic conflict does not disappear. It shifts to the body. Maté describes how patterns of chronic emotional repression are linked to a range of diseases, from autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis, lupus, and rheumatoid arthritis to cardiovascular diseases and cancer. When someone spends years trying to be strong, hiding their deepest emotions, their nervous system remains in a state of continuous alert. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, responsible for regulating the stress response, is constantly activated. The body produces high doses of cortisol and adrenaline, which over time erode physiological balance. Furthermore, emotional repression weakens the immune system. Studies in psychoneuroimmunology show that individuals who suppress their emotions have weaker immune responses, making them more susceptible to infections and chronic diseases. And it's not just about physical illnesses. Anxiety, depression, and the chronic feeling of emptiness are manifestations of the same process. The body and mind screaming for an emotion that was never allowed to emerge. Maté illustrates this with numerous clinical accounts. Patients who, for decades, maintained a profile of extreme kindness, altruism, and a compulsive need to please others, always saying yes, always being the pillars of the family or workplace, often develop serious illnesses, not because they are weak, but because they were too strong for too long. Their body finally says no, when the mind insisted on saying yes. This pattern is more common than one might think. Perhaps you know someone like this. Perhaps you yourself are that person. Someone who always carries the weight of the world on their shoulders, who never allows a moment of vulnerability, who feels guilty just thinking about asking for help. But the truth is that this behavior is not sustainable. Sooner or later, the body reacts. Because there is a limit to repression. There is a price for this artificial strength. But where does this persona of absolute strength come from? Why do so many of us learn to build this emotional armor, even knowing, often unconsciously, that it destroys us? In the next part, we will explore the psychological roots of this phenomenon. How the persona of strength feeds the repressed shadow, creating a cycle of self-sabotage and silent suffering. To understand why so many of us cling to this mask of strength, we must dive into one of the deepest concepts of analytical psychology, the dynamic between persona and shadow. Each of us builds throughout life a persona, a socially acceptable image that we present to the world. It is shaped by the expectations of culture, family, school, and the work environment. It is a necessary adaptation. No one survives socially by showing all their vulnerabilities and deepest desires. But the problem arises when we confuse the persona with our true self. In the case of the strength persona, this identification becomes even more dangerous. When an individual comes to believe that their worth lies in always being strong, always resilient, always invulnerable, everything that does not fit this image, fear, sadness, fatigue, insecurity, is pushed into the depths of the unconscious. This repressed material does not disappear. It accumulates in what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow is composed of all the aspects of the psyche that we reject or deny out of fear or shame. And the more we feed the strength persona, the more the shadow grows. Unconfronted fears, unexpressed hurts, denied weaknesses, all of this becomes a hidden source of tension and internal conflict. The individual begins to live a psychic split. On one side, the public image of self-control and strength. On the other, an underground sea of repressed emotions. This dissociation comes at a very high price. The more rigid the persona, the greater the pressure exerted on the shadow. This generates psychic symptoms such as chronic anxiety, panic attacks, depression, and physical symptoms such as the autoimmune diseases described by Gabor Maté. The body becomes the stage where the shadow tries to manifest, where the repressed truth of the psyche seeks at any cost to be heard. Furthermore, this repression feeds a cycle of self-sabotage. The individual begins to emotionally isolate themselves. The more they try to appear strong, the less they can ask for help. The shame of their own vulnerability prevents them from genuinely connecting with others. Relationships become superficial, emotional loneliness deepens, and the greater the isolation, the greater the need to maintain the mask. A vicious cycle sets in. The most tragic part is that this pattern is widely reinforced by culture. As we have seen, we live in a society that rewards performance and punishes vulnerability. The strength persona is often publicly celebrated. The heroes of everyday life are those who never fail, who do not show emotions, who face everything with a smile on their face. This narrative not only legitimizes repression, but also makes it even harder to break free from it. But there is a way out. And this way out begins by questioning the very ideal of strength that has been sold to us. What does it really mean to be strong? Is this quest for invulnerability actually blocking our growth and healing? This is what we will explore in the next part, where we will unmask the false ideal of strength that hinders genuine development and traps us in silent suffering. In almost all modern cultures, being strong has become synonymous with an unattainable ideal, the unflappable individual who never wavers never shows pain or weakness, and who deals with any adversity with unwavering self-confidence. This image is present in movies, series, social media, and corporate discourse. We are bombarded with stories of extreme overcoming, glorifying the individual who can take it all, who endures trauma and pressure without ever asking for help or showing a trace of vulnerability. But this is an ideal that, besides being unrealistic, is profoundly toxic. True strength does not lie in the denial of pain, but in the recognition and acceptance of one's own humanity. However, the false ideal of strength imposed on us acts like psychological poison. It teaches that weakness is a moral failure, that feeling fear or sadness is a sign of inferiority, that depending on others is shameful, and above all, that asking for help is an act of cowardice. As a result, the individual internalizes a pattern of relentless self-demand. They become both judge and executioner of themselves, punishing any sign of fragility that arises in their internal experience. This emotional rigidity not only paralyzes psychological development, but also hinders the possibility of true healing. As Gabor Maté explains, for the body and mind to recover, an internal space is needed where emotions can be felt and processed. When suffering is denied or repressed in the name of strength, it does not disappear. It accumulates, often unconsciously, until it manifests as physical illnesses or psychological disorders. It is the body, as Maté says, that ultimately says no, when the mind insists on saying yes. Furthermore, the belief in this false ideal of strength generates profound emotional isolation. The individual who does not allow themselves to be vulnerable cannot genuinely connect with others. Their relationships become superficial, based on social roles rather than authentic exchanges. Emotional intimacy, which requires openness and trust, becomes impossible. And the more isolated the individual feels, the more they cling to the persona of strength, as if it were their last bastion of identity. Erich Fromm, in the Sane Society, warns of this danger. In a culture of having and appearance, the human being alienates themselves from their own essence. The mask they build to survive socially becomes a prison, and in trying to embody the ideal of absolute strength, the individual ends up mutilating fundamental parts of their self, their sensitivity, their empathy, their capacity to love and be loved. There is yet another aspect of this trap: psychic overload. Sustaining the persona of strength requires continuous and exhausting effort. It is like carrying an invisible burden that consumes vital energy at every moment. On the outside, the individual may seem unbreakable. On the inside, they live in a constant state of alertness and tension. Over time, this overload translates into chronic fatigue, anxiety disorders, depression, and, in more severe cases, psychosomatic or autoimmune diseases. It is not about physical weakness, but a collapse generated by excessive artificial strength. That is why insisting on this ideal of strength blocks the true healing process. It is not possible to heal without first recognizing and accepting one's own suffering. It is not possible to integrate the fragmented parts of the self without confronting repressed emotions. And above all, it is not possible to live a full and authentic life while trying to inhabit a mask that denies one's own humanity. But if this ideal of strength makes us sick and distances us from ourselves, what would be the way forward? How to break this pattern and begin a journey of true healing and self-discovery? The answer lies in a radical shift in perspective. Understanding that vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, but the deepest expression of courage. And that is exactly what we will explore in the next part. Why allowing oneself to be vulnerable is the first and most powerful step towards inner freedom and authenticity. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Few concepts are as misunderstood as vulnerability. In popular imagination, being vulnerable is synonymous with weakness. It is to open oneself to judgment, disdain, and possible abandonment. It is to expose oneself in a world that seems merciless. For this reason, most of us have been conditioned to avoid any demonstration of vulnerability. We learned from a very early age that crying is unacceptable, that expressing fear is shameful, that asking for help is humiliating. Thus, we internalize the belief that we must be self-sufficient, impermeable, emotionally unbeatable. But this is a dangerous illusion. Moreover, it is a complete inversion of reality. Because, as authors like Erich Fromm and Gabor Maté show, true strength does not lie in the denial of vulnerability. It lies in the courage to accept it, to inhabit it, to bring it to light. Exposing oneself emotionally is an act of courage because it goes against everything modern culture teaches us. It requires the willingness to abandon the mask of perfection and acknowledge, I also feel fear. I also suffer. I also don't have all the answers. This willingness is not a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it is a sign of psychological maturity. As Fromm states, emotional authenticity is one of the pillars of a healthy psyche. Being able to accept and express one's own vulnerability is what allows us to live genuine relationships, build deep connections, and above all, initiate a true process of self-knowledge. Because no one can truly know themselves while hiding behind a facade. Furthermore, vulnerability is the fertile ground where true healing occurs. There is no way to process old traumas, repressed hurts, or self-destructive patterns without first allowing oneself to feel. And feeling implies being vulnerable. It implies relinquishing control. It implies letting long-buried emotions come to the surface, no matter how uncomfortable or painful they may be. Gabor Maté emphasizes that many of his sickest patients were precisely those who, for years or decades, refused to be vulnerable. They were the strong people, always willing to take care of others but unable to care for themselves. And when they finally allowed themselves to break that armor, when they admitted their exhaustion, fear, and sadness, they began to experience a profound liberation. The body responded, the mind cleared, because what is repressed becomes ill, but what is accepted has the power to transform. In this sense, vulnerability is a strength, perhaps the most powerful one we can cultivate, because it is not reactivity, it is not emotional weakness, it is a conscious choice to live in tune with one's own truth. It is an affirmation of humanity in the face of a world that demands masks. But how to begin to walk this path? How to break with years, sometimes decades, of conditioning that taught us to be strong at any cost? How to rebuild a more authentic relationship with ourselves and with others? The answer lies in a gradual process of reconnection with the true self. And that is exactly what we will explore in the next and final part: how to initiate a path of healing and integration, freeing oneself from the persona of strength and reclaiming a fuller and more authentic existence. We arrive, then, at the essential truth. The cost of maintaining a facade of constant strength is immense, and for many, invisible. Beneath the surface of seemingly successful lives, what we often find are exhausted bodies, overloaded minds, repressed emotions, and a growing disconnection from the authentic self. It is not uncommon for these same people, regarded as examples of strength and resilience, to secretly feel empty, anxious, on the brink of collapse. This does not happen due to weakness. It happens because they have been taught, for decades, that being human is not enough, that one must be more, stronger, more productive, more perfect. But true strength does not lie in the denial of vulnerability. It emerges from the deep acceptance of who one is, with lights and shadows, with certainties and doubts, with strengths and fragilities. When you allow yourself to feel, when you let go of the demand for perfection and embrace your human condition, something extraordinary happens. You reconnect with your essence, with others, with life. It is not an easy path. Breaking free from years of conditioning requires courage. It requires a willingness to question deeply rooted narratives. It demands facing old fears and an entire culture that rewards superficiality and performance. But it is a necessary path, because as long as you remain trapped in the armor of strength, your true life will be suspended. And the body, sooner or later, will demand the price of this emotional exile. Now, the choice is in your hands. You can continue to wear the mask and perpetuate the cycle of silent suffering. Or you can begin, starting today, a process of reconnection. And it starts with a small step. Admitting to yourself that you don't have to be strong all the time. That feeling pain is not failure. That asking for help is not shameful. That vulnerability, far from being a sign of weakness, is the gateway to a freer, more authentic, more alive existence. And you? Are you ready to take that step? Are you willing to shed the armor and look within, honestly? I want to hear your voice. Share in the comments. In what moments of your life did you realize that trying to be strong all the time only deepened your suffering? Or, if you still carry that armor, what else prevents you from letting it fall? Your experience may inspire others to reflect and perhaps to begin their own healing journey as well. And if this video resonated with you, don't stop here. Keep exploring. The next video on the channel delves even deeper into this journey. And believe me, it is essential for anyone determined to transform their relationship with themselves and the world. Don't miss it. And of course, if you value this type of content, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with those you know need to hear this message. Because no one needs to carry this weight alone. Change begins with a choice, and that choice can start now.